Okay, I'm going to show you how to make two plants today. One grass and one a tree, because these are the two most common types of plants you run into in a game environment. If you know how to make a tree, you can make a bush. If you know how to make grass, you can make flowers and other kind of like shrubs and ferns and things like that, because they're basically done in a very similar way. So the first thing I'm going to make is something, a stylized sort of looking grass. We're not going to try to go too realistic on this one. It requires a lot of textures and a lot of processing power. So we're going to keep things kind of an interesting stylized look, but with a lot of detail. So the first thing I want to add is a plane, and planes are really the key to doing a lot of this stylized kind of work. The first thing I'm going to do is scale it in, because I want to make it about the size of a blade of grass. And let's go ahead, I don't need these, I'll use that for a demo later. And I'm going to add one cut down the middle, and I'm going to add a cut along here because I just want this upper corner. So Control I and delete everything else so that I have just this piece with its pivot in the corner so that I can set up a little modifier for it. The whole thing was just for that. So we can set up the mirror, and I can mirror it in both the X and Y axis. And I want it looking straight down. Even though the grass is going to be shooting up eventually, I want to model it from here, and you'll see why in a second. So with this all in mirror, I'm going to split this into about 3 pieces. I'm going to take this here, M at last, and I'm going to use this, the tweak tool, from the top perspective, because if I do it from here, it can go up and down. I want to do it from this orthographic top, because this lets me choose and change the shape of the overall model, just like so. And then I can take these with these center pieces, and just G middle drag and move it down a little bit in this axis, just like so. So this becomes my blade of grass. I'm going to go ahead and shade it smooth, but I want to keep this little crease in here. So I'm going to hit mark seam, not mark seam, I'm going to do mark sharp, and then make sure I set it to auto smooth. Back here. A lot of steps in here to essentially just get a relatively simple object with a single division down the center. This is going to be the basis for our, this is sort of a game low poly level grass that you could use for something. There's other ways of doing grass, but this is just, I want to show you a fairly easy way, fairly straightforward way. Now what I want to do is go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and apply this modifier because it's what I want it to do. In edit mode, I'm going to tab into it. I'm just going to move it up so its tail end here is sitting right on top of the origin point. This is really important because the origin point sort of says this is where this object comes from. And if I move it in edit mode, I don't have to remove the pivot later. I could always move the pivot manually using Control period. I just think it's easier sometimes just go straight into edit mode and move the whole thing and line it up with where I want it to go. So now let's think about how we can actually add some shade to this so it looks like a grass leaf. Now, fortunately, grass is pretty simple. It's a straight line up. So let's go to our UV editing tab, look at it from the Z-axis, and A to select everything, U to unwrap. And instead of doing any of these unwraps, I'm going to do project from view bounds. If I do just project from view, it's just going to try to fit it into its relative size. However, if I do project from view bounds, it's going to fit the whole thing into the whole space. This is great because I want to use the entire UV space. Now that I've done that, let's pop into my shading mode, and let's create a new texture. And I already have a grass, but I'm going to make a new one, and this is going to be grass underscore demo map. So this, of course, what I want to do is just like I did with the terrain, I want to pull in some kind of curve, but I want to use it from the UV. So let's click this and Control T, because with our node wrangler, it's going to give us our coordinate systems. So I can run my UV into my vector, and out of my vector, I can get a separate XYZ, plug vector into vector, and this time instead of the Z-axis, I want the Y-axis because it's going to be the Y-axis of our UVs. So if I take my Y-axis here, I plug it straight into my color, you can see it's giving me a little dark down there and a little lighter up there. So let's go ahead and plug that into the ramp. Take my Y-axis, run it into a color ramp, and then plug this straight into base color. So now what I have is a slider that lets me go up to black or pull this all the way down to white. And when I have black and white, of course, I can use it as a factor. So I can take a mix RGB node. I like these mix RGB nodes a lot. I can technically color it from here by just changing the colors in this to whatever I want. But I find it's a lot harder to make really quick changes to and come back to. And the mix node is nice because instead I can just take this color into factor. And it gives me basically the same thing, but now it's a lot easier to choose two different colors. So maybe this is my dark green color, lower the saturation a little bit. And this will be my lighter, more yellowish green color. And you can see what's happening here. So then I could play with this slider to decide how it is interpreted on my blade of grass. And grass is actually relatively shiny. So let's lower that roughness a little bit. And so this is the start to our grass. Now coming back into my layout view, I could take this, duplicate it, rotate it X90, and just start populating these around. Just create a bunch of them and rotate them and move them. But I don't like that. I like to use nodes and teach you guys new things as much as I can because it's more fun that way. Plus I'm lazy, so I like doing things the easy way. So let's go ahead. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to say, let's add a circle because I want to create a round area. What I want to do is create a clump of these little plants. And so with this little clump here, I'm going to take this object in edit mode. I'm going to grid fill it because I want it to be a nice square grid, just like so. So the number of sides doesn't really matter, but I like having nice quads and grids in here. And this is temporary. This doesn't matter what this looks like. This is just a starting spot for me to go with. Because I'm going to select this and I'm going to add a new hair system. And you can see when I do that, it adds all these little lines. I can choose how many there are, and I can choose how long they are. But what I'm going to do is tell the computer, everywhere you see one of these, I want you to put one of these. And we do this using what's called a particle instance. Now I'm going to reduce the segments on this maybe down to 3. I want to keep it pretty simple. So segments is the number of sides. The nice thing about these little hairs is if I go into this upper right-hand corner, I can go to particle edit mode, and this little brush, if I set it to comb, lets me actually pull this around. So this is called hair because predictably that's what it's used to do, is create hair. We'll talk about using this later for characters, but you're going to see what we're really using it for is just directing the flow of things. By the way, really good tip that you should all change in your settings. First thing you absolutely can. In your key map, there is this pie menu on drag. I use this all the time. By default, it's off. What pie menu on drag means is you're used to hitting tab to go in and out of things, but if you hold tab and you drag it, you actually get every other feature you want. You're going to be using a lot of weight and vertex painting. You might swap into sculpt and into edit mode. You might see me use this. This is just a nice way of skipping in and out of different modes really quickly while still maintaining the functioning of tap this. So it's a setting I really recommend. I think works a lot better and it's a lot faster. So back to what I was doing over here. Let's set this, let's delete this edit because I made some changes to it. And after that, I can't change these things. Let's say, just start us with something simple like 16 of these. Nothing too complicated again. So I want to take this object now. I'm going to add a new modifier to it. And this is going to be called a particle instance. And this is going to take this object and say, hey, I want to go ahead and put it on top of a particle. So let's take an object. And it's going to put it on this particle right here. Now it moved everything way over here, and that's because these two objects are not in the same spot. I want to make sure they're both zeroed out together. And in the particle instance, I want to make sure I check create along paths. And I want to check size. So the size is being controlled by this object. So now what I can do, now that I'm creating along paths, and I've got my position, I can play with my rotation. Oh, you know what? Another thing is I have scale isn't zeroed out on this. So let's take that because my scale is still here, which is one of the reasons it's screwing up right now. So let's hide this for a second. Select this object, Control A, and all transforms. We just want to make sure everything's back in here. Okay, much better. So this is going to give me this. And I know it definitely is looking a little wrong right now, but that's okay. We're going to work with that. But I can change my rotation to be random, so I set it to 100, so it rotates in different spots. So you can see it's starting to give me this this like thing we're talking about. Let's go back to this object, my little circle, and let's go into our particle settings here in our particle tab. And I can change up my overall length. Let's go back to this here, because I think here, particle settings wise, do I want to keep the size? I guess not. That's just going to do too much weirdness. So with this now, I have the ability to choose how long this overall shape is and how many of these leaves are going to be in here. Let's start, like I said, I think 16 is a nice start. And now I can start actually changing and editing them. So I don't edit the leaves because the leaves are just following the hair. Instead, I'm going to edit the particle edit on this sphere. So with this tool, you can see it can start brushing things around. I can also change it to, there's a bunch of different ones, like I can change length individually. F makes the brush larger and smaller, but if I have lengthen, it's going to stretch some out, and if I hold shift, it makes some of them smaller. The second little mode here is called selection mode, and this is going to let me hover over any of these, hit L, and select it by itself, shift A to deselect, and this lets me make some changes to individual ones. Most of the time you're going to use comb, and you want to use it pretty big, because we're just trying to get these to all point in very different direction. Shift A, and I'm going to go around a little bit and just make some changes. Again, the problem with hair works really great when you're trying to do all of these, but I don't want to edit all of these at once because it just feels too much like they're swaying in all the same direction. And that's not necessarily how plants look. But to me, this is a quicker change than trying to use just doing everything by hand and just placing and rotating these. Give them a little bit of visual interest. I can also add more hairs. So in this case, let's go back into that particle edit, and I can see that there's definitely some gaps where I don't have, and I should have some hair. So let's go ahead and use this guy. It's called the Add tool. Let's go to Tool and make sure by default it's set to 10. I don't want that many. I want to set it to just 1. And that lets me just pick out a couple of empty gaps where maybe I want to add another hair or two. And then it's the process, like I've shown you already, of just branching and sort of bringing them together. Now, this can be a time-consuming process. I think when I did this, I spent maybe a good 15 minutes going through, but I still got to show you how to make trees. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. I also did want to show you that if you come in here and you feel like these are too fat, like I do now, I can always go into my blades and just scale them in X, and it's going to propagate through it. When I like what I have with my grass, and I see that it's looking pretty nice, I got one more crucial step, and it's to go to this particle instance and apply it. And now I can just hide this. I don't need it anymore, and this is now my game-ready grass. And what I can do with this is duplicate it and rotate it. And the way this grass is going to work is, let's just kind of do a duplicate, rotate, duplicate, rotate. We're going to do this, and I'll show you how we can actually move and position these when we get into rocks using nodes. But you can see it actually gets pretty convincing when you start stacking a bunch of them together. And it's the same objects repeated over and over again, so it's actually really efficient on your computer. Make sure you keep your original, though. Let's delete this, and I'm going to name this grass _01, because maybe you want to make a couple variations, a taller patch of grass, or you want to put a flower in one of these, or something a little different, or some grass that has some different color or height, or some shoots coming off of it, and then you can mix it in to the whole system. Let's hide this, and let's get making a tree. So instead of trying to make a really realistic tree, which usually requires a lot of photo reference, the process is something like what I did there, but you actually bake the leaves down onto a card, and then you work with that. I'm going to show you a simpler, more stylized way of doing the same idea, but if you have a leaf texture, it works exactly the same way. So I'm going to generate a new plug. I'm going to show you a new plugin that you haven't used yet, but it comes with Blender, and it's under add-ons, and it's called Sapling Tree Generator, and it goes in the curves. If you ever want to know how something works, almost all of these have documentation, and they also tell you where those things are. So if I go Shift A, and I come into curve, I can add this sapling tree generator down to the bottom. Now, a couple notes. you'll be like, whoa, tree, pretty much done. It's going to be missing a few things, and I'm going to show you how we can get the leaves and stuff, because there is a leaf setting in here, but I don't really like how they're doing it. It's much, much better to do it manually, the way I'm going to show you how. There are a couple things to note. If I do click off of this and start rotating out, often, as soon as I do this, I lose my whole menu and I can't change it back. However, if you haven't done anything else, if I haven't moved anything or deleted anything, I can always hit F9 and get this generator back. Otherwise, I would just say just delete it and start over, because you want to be able to make changes to things in the sapling tree generator. So under here, there are some presets. So things like maple are pretty nice. I think willow and stuff like that. I don't know what it starts with. White birch, whatever setting. But there's a couple things I want to change. These are all settings that turn it into different curves. And let's see if I can visualize this with wireframe. You can see the geometry it's generating, and it's actually pretty high for us. So I want to set this bevel resolution down to 0 because it's pretty simple, and I can do the same thing with curve. I could set the bevel resolution maybe to 1 because I don't need that many sides. And then I'm going to come into this branch splitting, which is my third tab. And we can see I have lots of settings on here. So I might set this base levels down to 1. Change up the number of splits that I have here. So I don't need as many splits. Maybe I don't need as many levels, because I want to keep this tree a little simpler. And I can edit the number of overall branches. So here in this little tab, I can set some branches. Down here, I can set how much detail the curve has. And so I don't want quite as much detail. So we can see I'm just getting between these different settings how much complexity. Oh, the first one, my bad. How much complexity is going into it. Let's see if I can go. 2 is way too high. You can actually get into real trouble if you click this too high, because it's going to really slow my computer down. Set that to 1. Set the baselets, maybe go to 2. So I was just playing with stuff. I didn't want to waste your time. I set it to levels about 2, base splits of 0. Here's my branches, and I can reduce this down. Maybe something like 8. And I can set this curve resolution a little lower. And a little lower too. So this is like, it's fun to just like look at and see what some of these different ones do and what the little settings change. I think this is pretty nice for me for my purposes though. And it's simple enough geometry that I can really work with. But we just want a few of these, because anything too complicated is really gonna throw this whole works off, and kind of go through these one at a time. I think that's pretty reasonable, because I want to keep this low because I'm going to be using a lot of these. So as soon as I've done this, I can click off because I've got what I need. And now I'm really concerned with how I'm going to make out my individual leaves and things like that. But I need to first generate shapes for everything. So let's take this. It's right now, it's a curve. And as you recall from a curve, it is not geometry. So spacebar, and we're going to go convert to mesh. So now it's a piece of mesh geometry. We'll be able to unwrap it and texture it with something like a bark texture or whatever we want. And I can also come in here and hit on this guy, L and L and L. Sort of fix the positions of some of these. Some of these branches that didn't quite connect up together. I got something by accident there. Is G to get it moved into a reasonable spot. Rotating around a lot to get that perspective. Okay, so now I got this, and this is going to be the basis of my tree. I need to think about those clumps, and this is a deciduous tree. So what we want is I'm going to take mesh, and I'm going to create a base. And that's all it is. This UV sphere is just going to be like clumps of leaves is how I'm thinking about it. So let's just take this and start duplicating it and moving it into places where I would have my leaves and branches on things. So this one has a pretty big break in the center, and I'm like kind of thinking about with these clusters of leaves here. And then changing just spheres, but like these ones are going to be smaller, and then some of the ones closer to the center, say here, might be a little bit bigger because it has more branches to sort of connect out to. And again, I'm just trying to get a sense overall of my shape and what kind of tree that's going to make for me. Depending on your tree, these might be denser, these might be broader. This is kind of a tree that's sort of bifurcating and coming out in two major directions. Once I've done that, I need to change their shape. Now I could come into edit mode and play with it there, but sculpt mode works so well, and it's actually a perfect chance to play with that a little bit. I'm going to go into each of these. I'm going to select all of these together. I like having them all at once. I'm going to hit Control J and combine them all into one piece. So all these little spheres are all one piece. Now I can come into sculpting, zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to use my grab tool. We played with this a little bit when we worked on our treasure chest, but I just love these kind of tools because they're great ways of moving objects and just thinking about shape and not worrying too much about the tools because you're moving lots of verts at once. Hit N to open this side panel. Let's go to Tool here. Under Advanced, I want Topology. What this means is with Topology off, you see it's going to move all of them together. With Topology on, it cares whether or not this individual shape is part of the actual geometry. So if there aren't any verts connected, it won't be part of it. So now I'm just carving out big shapes and looking for interesting silhouettes. Sometimes even this is like people will actually like use a lighting with a background and just try to see how it's going to look as a lit object, because these will be the clumps that my tree branches will be fit around. Whatever shape they make will be the shapes my leaves will overall conform to. So if I want an area that's a little bit has like that density, see this? So if you were doing something really stylized, this actually might be a fine low poly tree, but of course we want to do something much more visually interesting than that. So what we're going to do is sort of an older approach, but it's really great for creating stylized trees and assets. We're going to create a plane and we're going to turn it into 3-plane. So with it selected in edit mode, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it, right click to put it back, RY90. I'm going to do the same thing, Shift D to duplicate this, put it back, and RZ90. So what I'm getting is this little object here that has its center origin and has all of the different sides. When I put a leaf kind of pattern on it, it's going to create a nice dense thing. This was a technique that came up with years ago. Someone working at a company called Airborne Studios really kind of took off, and a lot of things like bushes and shrubberies are also done using this technique. So what I need for this is a simple alpha texture. So let's take our object here, and we're going to come into our texture paint tab. And I actually don't need to worry about anything on this side because I'm going to do it all in here. I already made a version of this in here, this little leaves OP, but I'm going to make something new so you can see it. So I'm going to say new, and I'm going to say call this leaf, and I call this OP for opacity. Underscore OP lets me know this is for the opacity. 1024 by 1024 is more than enough, but I want to make sure alpha is on and the color is set to black. So this means wherever I paint white is going to be able to see through. Let's say OK, and now in my paint mode, I have brushes, and if I don't have it set to anything, it's set to black right now, it doesn't show. But if I hit this little swap here on the palette, I can start painting out white, which is me painting my opacity map. Now, by default, this brush might be, say, a lot bigger. Let's F. It might be trying to be a lot softer or fuzzier. I like to set my curve fall off. I think by default it's something like smooth, which is too soft for me. So I like to set it to maybe one of these, which is a little sharper. So inverse square is pretty good. Sphere is also nice. Just something that's going to give me a nice sharp edge. Like if you want to go really, really sharp with the edge, you can always do constant, which doesn't have any fall off, but I think inverse square works pretty well for this. Actually, I'll do here. Let's take my brush and let's hit F to shrink it down a little bit. And I'm gonna turn up here. This is the default is strength. It wants to make strength opacity, and I don't want that because I want it to just be white. This is very similar to any painting program, Photoshop, Krita, anything like that. Yeah, you could technically use Blender as your painting program. I don't know that I would, but you could. But I'm gonna turn this off here, and you could use Substance Painter for this too. I just think it's easier to do all in the program right now. So we have radius, and I have this set, and that means if you're using a pen, it'll actually respect, so without it, it's always the same thickness. With this, a pen-enabled tablet makes it a lot easier to draw the shape that you want. So I can draw some sort of just like leaf shapes and just fill them in. And let's just make like a nice leaf shape pattern, as if there's a bunch of leaves. Now this is where if we really want to go try hard on this, we might pull some photographs online of leaves and use Photoshop to make an alpha channel for them. And that's something we would apply the same way I'm doing here. I'm keeping it, relatively simple. I'm kind of doing these little heart-shaped leaves. And I'm just trying to fill in major gaps. And you'll see why in a second. So now that I got this, I'm going to swap my paint color. Let's get in a little closer. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller. And the way you get, this is also a good painting trick, the way you get nice lines on stuff like this is usually to actually erase. The erase is where, like, I think the really good stuff is happening in creating some of the shapes that you want. So, like, we get to really carve. I kind of think about this like I'm carving out with clay or something like that, the overall shape of my leaf. Okay, close here. I don't want to spend too much time in a tutorial video on this. Swap back this up a little bit. However I define the shape here is how it's going to show up on my object. Okay, so a couple blobs. Nothing too fancy. Now when we go into shading, and I'm going to look at this thing here, I'm going to add new material, and this is going to be Leaves Demo Matte. And I'm going to add Shift A, another image texture, and Control T to hook this whole thing up. And I want to bring in that leaf OP is what I just made. I also made that leaves OP. And of course, this is just a color, but if we apply it instead of as a color, I apply it here as an alpha. And I set this in my material settings, B, clip, and alpha clip. Give it a second to sort of process and tell what's going on. Usually takes a moment to compile shaders. And now what we have is something like this, which doesn't look like a lot on its own. You see the one, I'll pull up the one I made earlier. Do this leaves matte. I did the same idea. I added this back facing so that I could have a different color for the front and back leaves, which is something you might want to try. But other than that, it's the exact same kind of thing. Oh, right, because Leaves OP is blank. Because I didn't save it. So if you're actually going to paint, by the way, something like your own texture matte, this is a really important tip. Glad I thought about that. So up here in File, we have something called External Data, and I want to turn it on to automatically pack into Blend. Because this is actually just an image, and if I haven't done anything to it, I haven't actually saved it. But I do want to make sure that under Image, I save it. and I save it somewhere on my computer. Otherwise, it's like any other external image. I could lose it. So if I close and reopen it, I won't get that, and you'll paint all this stuff and it won't come back. It's exactly what happened to me with this one. But this one's here, and I've got a nice front texture and a back texture. Play with this roughness to make it a little bit shinier. I could do more stuff to this. I could paint this. I could make this look like actual leaves. I could take photos of leaves and do this, but I want to show you the simplest version. Now what I have to do is say I want to make a bunch of these, and I want to stick them all over this. Now I could do this with, like, moving them and just putting them in a position or invert snapping it. But remember, with the leaves, with the grass, there's a much, much faster way of doing all of this stuff. And that's to use, just like I did before, a hair system. But this time I'm going to use it directly instead of an instant. So let's go to Add Modifier. And let's go to my little particle here, hair. And I'm going to reduce my number down to like 100 to start with. And let's set my length about here. That all seems pretty good. And let's take this object and let's add that particle instance. I like the particle instances a lot better because converting a hair is actually really annoying, and you have to like combine a ton of stuff. I don't want to do all that. So don't forget though, gotta have the same origin. Otherwise don't work properly. So let's take these and Shift A, all transforms. So both transforms should be at the center of the stage. So now with this, let's say create along paths, and you can see it's starting to generate these where they are. I can decide if I want to control the size from here or not. Doesn't matter. It's kind of up to you how you want to do that. But now I can choose this object, and in my particle settings, I can increase or reduce the number of these, and let's change my hair length, which will change these. I want them to stretch out though. So let's take a look at my settings. Size isn't what I want. If I have this, and I say keep shape, and then it will just kind of, keep me from getting these guys stretched out. Let's add this to a little position. Put it there and randomize that a little bit. And we'll do a rotation and a lot of randomized rotation. So now it's sitting on top of this, and let's go back here and to this object, take a look at its particle settings, and now I can just increase or decrease the number of these. I do want to change a couple of these. I'm going to change this from random order, so this will be more evenly distributed. And I can emit these from vertices, I can emit these from the overall volume, which puts it inside of it, but I want to keep it faces. And let's use modifier stack, so it kind of respects all the stuff that's happening here. I guess I could try a couple of these. Jitter might be pretty good. Particles per face, all that stuff. How much it can jitter around. So now what I want to do though is I want to see what this looks like just with this. So under renderer, I'm going to turn off show emitter, and under viewport display, I'm going to turn off show emitter. And now it's going to give me, let's turn off wireframe, and in my viewport, in my render, it sets the path. Let's set it to none. So now we can see what it's doing is it's just generating these leaves, but it's on top of this. So I can choose from these settings and see how dense I want this to be. And really we want it to be as light as we feel like we can get away from. So this is way too light. And this might be getting a little closer to something we can work with. And so the denser we go, the more complicated it's going to get. So maybe for me, somewhere in this realm, I'm going to go around here. And if I don't like how it looks, I can always change the seed, and I'll add a little bit of randomness to it. But I kind of like how it's spread out a little bit. Let's make it a little denser. Yeah, something like that seems pretty nice. Once again, almost done with the last step here. When we're done here, we can take this object and we can apply that parameter. And now we don't need this other spheres. It's just something to start with. I need to do one more thing. So the problem I have now is that these objects, all of their normals are painting all over the place. So if I select these and I go to my little tab, you can see this is the our split normal information, and the direction that these normals are facing is all over the place. You might say this looks pretty good, but we can actually make it look a lot better. What we need to do is actually change the direction those little normals are facing in. So once again, right now they're facing all over the place, but we want them to sort of, if I'm in this mode here, radiate outward from some kind of a center. So this is going to be the last thing we do, our last step to finishing this tree up. Turn off my annotation again. So what I want to make is a shape that conforms around this. And I'm going to turn these into two groups of faces here. So B, and I'm going to drag over all of these. I need to be in X-ray mode, because if I'm not in X-ray mode and I hit B and I drag over, it might miss some of them that are behind others. So X-ray mode means I can get everything. And I'm going to hit P, and I'm going to do this by selection so that I have two groups of leaves. I'm going to combine them again later, but this is important for now. So I'm going to make another sphere. Again, spheres are nice, simple objects for this kind of thing. So another, not icosphere, I want a UV sphere. Mesh, UV sphere, and I'm going to move this into place. I'm going to scale this up relative to the size of this overall branch. I'm going to set right click, shade smooth, and now I want to change its shape in my sculpt mode, which is I can either come over here and just click sculpting, or something, if I'm just in here making a quick edit, I can use that tab drag menu I showed you. F, and I can just large brush. Whenever I'm sculpting, we'll get into this when we get into characters, I use very large brushes. Our goal is to make this just big enough that it contains everything and no leaves are poking through. It's very important that none of these leaves end up poking through, because otherwise it'll try to flip its normals backwards, which we do not want. That's going to create some weird stuff. So until we want to get an overall shape, I can set it to this mode so I can sort of see through a little bit, and I just want to make sure that none of these creases, it's overall following pretty closely to the shape. Something like that looks pretty good. Go back into this mode, turn off X-ray. And now what I can do, let's go into wireframe, makes it easier to select these. I'm going to select this inside little group of leaves. I'm going to add a new modifier, and this one's called data transfer. Because if we look at this object and we go into tab, you see its normals, they're exactly how we want to face. They're all radiating outward. Versus, as I said before, these normals are all over the place. So if we take this and we say a data transfer, and our source of data is this, we can come down here into face corner data, custom normals, and let's say nearest corner, nearest face. So now what this is going to do is say, hey, look for this, look at this object, and try to copy the data that's there. Let's go ahead and apply this. Now if I tab in, it should be, oh, you know what? One step I forgot with this. I got to take these and I shade them smooth, and I also have to turn on auto smooth. It actually gave me a warning. I didn't pay attention to it. So let's add another data transfer. This one, same deal, face corner data, custom normals, and this fourth option, nearest corner or nearest face. I think before with this off, yeah, it was giving me enable auto smooth. So I ignored that at my own peril. Now let's take a look and apply it. And now all of our normals are heading out in the same direction. Okay, so what did that do for me? Let's take a look. So this one here, we can see it kind of treating these as like one big clump of images, whereas these, so like they're more spread out and they're all facing together, whereas this is still being shaded individually. It doesn't seem like a big deal right now, but if I try to create a scene, let's create a sunlight. What about here? Let's jump real quick into our lighting tab. And these look a lot better in the way they're lit. And these are a lot rougher because the individual faces are coming out. They're all pointing in their own direction. Whereas this is more like a clump of softened and average normals, which is really key to getting the overall technique right. So to do this as a final step, you just do the exact same thing, but you just do it for that. Applying textures or materials to the trunk is pretty simple. We could keep it a flat color. We could use any procedural stuff, or we can grab some textures and bark. from online, or you could paint it by hand if you want with a tiling texture similar to how we did last week. So I know a little bit of a longer video because I wanted to show you how to make both types of plants. Save both of these. We're going to use both of these later, the grass and this tree. So when you're finished, we can combine all of these parts together. Probably going to want to make a material for this really quick. Call this bark mat. Let's just give it a quick dark desaturated brown material. I'm going to put all these together, and this can be tree_01. And then this will be my grass_01. And we're going to, next video, I'm going to show you how to use both of these models and how we can actually distribute it into a scene for us. I'll see you in the next